I thought I had it all: a loving husband, two beautiful children, and a perfect life. But one phone call shattered that illusion forever. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Lunch at our usual spot. Jay." Those words on my husband's phone screen turned my world upside down. Suddenly, I was questioning everything: the late nights at the office, the new cologne, the secretive behavior. How could I have been so blind? As I unraveled the web of lies, I faced a choice: crumble under the weight of betrayal or rise from the ashes stronger than ever. This is my story of heartbreak, resilience, and rediscovery. A journey from the depths of despair to unexpected triumph. But here's the question that haunted me. In rebuilding my life, would I discover a version of myself I never knew existed? I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, doesn't it? 10 years ago, I was just Sarah Thompson, a bright-eyed 25-year-old fresh out of college with big dreams of changing the world one student at a time. I had landed my first job as a high school English teacher, and I was over the moon. The pay wasn't great, but I didn't care. I was doing what I loved. It was during my first week at Westfield High that I met Michael. He was volunteering to help with the school's career day, representing his marketing firm. I remember thinking how handsome he looked in his crisp suit, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. We got talking during the lunch break, and I was immediately drawn to his charm and wit. "So, what made you want to become a teacher?" he asked, genuinely interested. I laughed, feeling a bit self-conscious. "Oh, the usual. Summers off, the joy of shaping young minds, and the thrill of grading endless piles of essays." He chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "Sounds glamorous, but seriously, I admire what you do. It takes a special kind of person to dedicate their life to education." I felt my cheeks flush at his compliment. We ended up talking for the entire break, and by the end, he had asked for my number. Our relationship moved quickly after that. Within a year, we were engaged, and 6 months later, we were saying, "I do," in front of our closest friends and family. I felt like I was living a fairy tale. Fast forward 8 years, and our little family had grown. Emma came along 2 years into our marriage, a perfect little bundle with Michael's brown eyes and my curly hair. 3 years later, we welcomed Ethan, completing our family of 4. Life was, well, it was pretty close to perfect. We had a cozy house in a nice suburban neighborhood with a white picket fence and everything. I loved my job at the high school, where I had worked my way up to head of the English department. Michael's career was on an upward trajectory too. He had recently been promoted to marketing manager at his firm, which meant longer hours, but also a significant pay bump. I prided myself on being a supportive wife. When Michael started coming home later due to his new responsibilities, I made sure dinner was kept warm for him. When he had to work weekends to meet tight deadlines, I took the kids on outings so he could have peace and quiet at home. "You're amazing, you know that," he'd say, giving me a quick peck on the cheek as he rushed out the door in the mornings. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I basked in those moments, feeling like we were a team conquering the world together. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I genuinely believed we had something special. Looking back, I wonder if I was just naive or willfully blind. Maybe a bit of both. I was so caught up in the idea of our perfect life that I missed the early warning signs. The late nights at the office that became more and more frequent. The way he'd turn his phone face down when I entered the room. The sudden interest in his appearance, buying new clothes and switching to an expensive cologne. But hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? At the time, I rationalized it all away. He was working hard for our family. He wanted to look good for his new position. I trusted him completely. That trust was about to be shattered in ways I couldn't even imagine. But sitting there on that ordinary Tuesday evening, waiting for Michael to come home for dinner, I had no idea that my world was about to be turned upside down. I was still Sarah Thompson, devoted wife and mother, living her happily ever after. If only I had known then what I know now. I guess the first time I really felt something was off was when Michael missed Emma's piano recital. Our little girl had been practicing for weeks, her tiny fingers plinking away at the keys every evening after dinner. She was so excited to show off her skills, especially to her daddy. "Mommy, do you think Daddy will like my song?" Emma asked that morning, her big brown eyes full of hope. "Of course, sweetie," I assured her, smoothing down her unruly curls. He wouldn't miss it for the world, but he did miss it. The recital was scheduled for 6 p.m., and at 5:45, I got a text from Michael. "Stuck in a meeting. Can't make it. Tell Emma I'm sorry." I stared at my phone, a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't like Michael. He'd always made a point of being there for the kids, important moments. I watched Emma scan the audience as she took her seat at the piano, her face falling when she realized her dad wasn't there. That night, after the kids were in bed, I confronted Michael about it. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, loosening his tie. "This big project came up, and the client insisted on a last-minute meeting. I couldn't get out of it." "But it was Emma's recital, Michael. You promised her." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. I'll make it up to her. Okay? I'll take her for ice cream this weekend." I wanted to argue more, but he looked so tired and stressed that I let it go. Maybe I was overreacting. After all, these things happen sometimes, right? But then it started happening more often. Michael began coming home later and later, always with the same excuse: big project at work. He'd miss family dinners, weekend outings, even Ethan's t-ball games. One night, as I was clearing the dinner dishes, Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy want to eat with us anymore?" My heart clenched. "Oh, honey, that's not true. Daddy's just very busy at work right now. He loves us very much." But even as I said the words, a little voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Is that really true?" I started noticing other changes, too. Michael began paying more attention to his appearance. He bought new suits, got a trendy haircut, and started using an expensive cologne that I didn't recognize. "What's with the new look?" I asked one morning as he was getting ready for work. He shrugged, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Just thought it was time for a change. Got to look sharp for the clients, you know." I nodded, but something about his response felt off. It was like he was trying too hard to sound casual. Then there were the phone calls. Michael's phone seemed to be ringing constantly, and he'd always step out of the room to answer. When I asked who it was, he'd mumble something about work and change the subject. One evening, I was folding laundry when Michael's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. The message preview caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Lunch at our usual spot. Jay." My heart skipped a beat. Jay? Who was Jay? And what was this usual spot? When Michael came home that night, I casually asked about his plans for the next day. "Oh, you know, the usual," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Meetings, client calls, probably grab a quick lunch at my desk." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. He was lying to me, blatantly lying. That night, as Michael slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing. Was I imagining things? Was I turning into one of those paranoid, suspicious wives? But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The Michael I married wouldn't miss his daughter's recital for a work meeting. The Michael I married wouldn't lie about his lunch plans. As I stared at the ceiling, a resolve began to form in my mind. I needed to know the truth. Whatever it was, I couldn't keep living like this, second-guessing everything, wondering what was real and what wasn't. Little did I know my world was about to be turned upside down. The truth I was seeking would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man sleeping beside me. But in that moment, lying in the dark, I was just a wife trying to understand what was happening to her family. I was just Sarah, clinging to the last threads of trust in my marriage, even as they began to unravel in my hands. The next few weeks were a blur of doubt and suspicion. I found myself watching Michael's every move, analyzing every word he said. It was exhausting, but I couldn't stop. The more I looked, the more I saw, and none of it was good. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I noticed Michael spending an unusually long time in front of the mirror. He was meticulously styling his hair and adjusting his new designer tie. "Big meeting today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, yeah," he replied, not quite meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Potential new client. Got to make a good impression, you know." I nodded, but my stomach churned. There was a time when he would have been excited about a big meeting, sharing all the details with me. Now, it felt like pulling teeth just to get a simple answer. Later that week, I was doing laundry when I came across one of Michael's dress shirts. As I was about to toss it in the washing machine, a faint scent caught my attention. It wasn't his usual cologne. This was sweeter, more floral, like a woman's perfume. My hands shook as I held the shirt to my nose. There was no mistaking it. The scent was definitely there. Clinging to the collar and cuffs, I felt sick to my stomach. That night at dinner, I couldn't eat. The kids chattered away, oblivious to the tension, while Michael scrolled through his phone, barely touching his food. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, finally looking up and noticing my full plate. I forced a smile. "Just a bit of a headache. I'll be fine." He nodded and went back to his phone. I watched him, wondering who he was texting. What secrets were hidden in that device? The urge to grab it and look through his messages was almost overwhelming. The next day, I was grocery shopping when I ran into my friend Lisa in the produce section. "Sarah, how are you?" she exclaimed, giving me a hug. "I haven't seen you in ages. How's Michael?" "Oh, you know, busy as always," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Work's been crazy for him lately." Lisa's face changed, just for a moment, but I caught it. A flicker of, what, pity, concern? "What is it?" I asked, my heart racing. She hesitated. "It's probably nothing, but I saw Michael the other day, at that new fancy restaurant downtown. He was with a woman. I assumed it was a work thing, but..." She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. I felt like the floor was tilting beneath my feet. "What did she look like?" I heard myself asking, as if from far away. "Tall, blonde, very attractive. Look, Sarah, I'm sure it was just a business lunch. I shouldn't have said anything." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We said our goodbyes, and I finished my shopping on autopilot, my mind whirling. That night, after the kids were in bed, I decided to confront Michael. I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. "Michael, we need to talk," I said, sitting down next to him on the couch. He looked up from his laptop, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Can it wait? I've got to finish this report." "No, it can't," I insisted. "Who were you having lunch with downtown yesterday?" His face went blank for a moment before he composed himself. "Oh, that was just a client meeting." "Why?" "Lisa saw you," I pressed. "She said you were with a woman, a tall, attractive blonde." Michael's jaw tightened. "That was Jessica, my new assistant. We were discussing a project over lunch." "Is that a crime now?" I felt a mix of relief and shame wash over me. Of course, it was just his assistant. How could I have doubted him? "I'm sorry," I mumbled. "I guess I've been feeling a bit insecure lately with all your late nights," and he cut me off. "Sarah, I'm working hard for this family. I don't need you spying on me or questioning my every move. Don't you trust me?" I nodded, feeling small and foolish. He was right. How could I have let my imagination run wild like that? But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, a nagging thought kept creeping in. If it was just an innocent lunch with his assistant, why did he look so guilty when I first asked about it? And why hadn't he mentioned Jessica before? I pushed the thoughts away, determined to trust my husband. But deep down, I knew. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was only going to grow. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The truth was far worse than I could have imagined, and it was hurtling towards me like a freight train. But for now, I clung to the illusion of our happy marriage, even as it crumbled beneath my fingers. I knew I should have let it go after that night, but I couldn't. The doubts kept gnawing at me, keeping me up at night. I'd catch myself staring at Michael when he wasn't looking, trying to see if I could spot any signs of what? Guilt. Deception. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for anymore. One morning, as I was packing the kids' lunches, I made a decision. I couldn't go on like this. I needed to know the truth, one way or another. And if Michael wasn't going to give it to me, I'd have to find it myself. "Hey, honey," I called out as Michael was rushing out the door. "I was thinking of dropping by your office for lunch today. We haven't done that in ages." Michael froze for a split second, his hand on the doorknob. "Oh, today's not great. I've got back-to-back meetings." I forced a smile. "No problem. Maybe another day." He nodded, looking relieved. "Yeah, sure. We'll plan it soon." As soon as he left, I sprang into action. I called the school, telling them I wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be in today. Then I got the kids off to school and waited. At 11:30, I drove to Michael's office building. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel, and my heart was racing. What was I doing? This wasn't me. I didn't spy on people, especially not my husband. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I parked across the street and waited, watching the entrance. At 12:15, Michael walked out. He looked around furtively before heading down the street. I waited a moment, then followed. He led me to a small, upscale restaurant a few blocks away. Through the window, I saw him join a woman at a table. Tall, blonde, attractive. Jessica, I presumed, his assistant. They were sitting close, heads bent together in conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language spoke volumes. The way she touched his arm, the way he leaned in to whisper something in her ear. It was intimate. Too intimate for a boss and his assistant. I felt sick. Part of me wanted to burst in there, to confront them both. But another part, a part I didn't even know existed, told me to wait, to gather more evidence, to be sure. So I sat there in my car watching my husband laugh and flirt with another woman, feeling my world crumble around me. After about an hour, they left the restaurant. Michael gave her a quick hug, too quick for my liking, before they parted ways. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling. What was I supposed to do now? Confront him? Pretend I didn't know? I felt lost, alone, and utterly betrayed. That evening, when Michael came home, I tried to act normal, but my hands shook as I set the table, and I could barely look him in the eye. "Everything okay, Sarah?" he asked, frowning slightly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Just a long day," I managed to croak out. He seemed satisfied with that and launched into a story about his day at work. I listened, wondering how many lies he was telling me. Was anything he said true anymore? After dinner, as I was washing dishes, Michael came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Thanks for dinner, babe," he murmured, kissing my neck. I stiffened, feeling bile rise in my throat. How could he touch me like this after being with her just hours ago? I wanted to scream, to push him away, to demand answers, but I didn't. I just stood there, letting the warm water run over my hands, feeling colder than I ever had in my life. That night, I lay awake long after Michael had fallen asleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the scenes from the restaurant over and over in my mind. How long had this been going on? Was it just a fling, or was it something more? And what about our family, our kids? I thought about Emma and Ethan, sleeping peacefully in their rooms, blissfully unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. How could I do this to them? But then again, how could Michael? As the first light of dawn crept through the window, I made a decision. I couldn't confront Michael yet. I needed more proof, concrete evidence that even he couldn't deny, and I knew just how to get it. I reached for my phone and sent a text to Lisa. Can we meet for coffee today? I need your help with something." Then I got up and started getting ready for the day, my mind buzzing with plans. I wasn't just going to sit back and let Michael destroy our family. I was going to fight. And God help him when I finally had the truth in my hands. Little did I know, the path I was about to embark on would lead me to discoveries far more painful than I could have imagined. But in that moment, as I steeled myself for what was to come, I felt a strange sense of calm. The worst had already happened. Now it was time to take control. Lisa was already at the coffee shop when I arrived, 2 steaming mugs on the table in front of her. As soon as she saw my face, her smile faded. "Oh, Sarah," she said, pulling me into a hug. "What's going on?" I sank into the chair across from her, feeling the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on me. "I think Michael's cheating on me," I blurted out, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Lisa's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" I told her everything. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, and what I'd seen at the restaurant. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down my face. "I need to know for sure," I said, wiping my eyes. "I can't confront him without solid proof." Lisa nodded, her face set with determination. "Okay, let's think this through. What about his phone? Have you tried looking at it?" I shook my head. "He guards it like it's Fort Knox, always has it with him, and when he doesn't, it's locked." We brainstormed for a while, coming up with and discarding various ideas. Finally, Lisa snapped her fingers. "I've got it. My brother's a private investigator. He could help us get the evidence you need." I hesitated. Hiring a PI felt like crossing a line, but hadn't Michael already crossed it? "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." The next week was a blur of secret meetings and clandestine phone calls. Lisa's brother, Tom, was professional and understanding. He explained how he'd follow Michael, take photos, and gather any evidence of infidelity. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, his eyes kind. "Once you know, you can't unknow." I nodded, my jaw set. I need to know the truth. As Tom went about his investigation, I tried to carry on as normal at home. But it was hard. Every time Michael touched me, I had to resist the urge to recoil. Every time he said he loved me, I wondered if he was saying the same things to her. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when I came across one of Michael's shirts. I quickly stuffed the paper in my pocket just as Michael walked in. "Hey, babe," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I turned my head at the last second, his lips grazing my cheek instead. He frowned. "Everything okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How dare he act concerned when he was planning a weekend away with his mistress? That night, I lay awake long after Michael had fallen asleep. I kept replaying our life together in my mind, wondering where it had all gone wrong. Had I not been attentive enough? Had I gotten too caught up in being a mom and forgotten to be a wife? No, I told myself firmly. This wasn't my fault. Michael had made a choice, a series of choices, that had led us here. I couldn't blame myself for his betrayal. The next day, Tom called me with an update. "I've got something," he said, his voice grim. "Can you meet me?" An hour later, I was sitting in Tom's car, looking at a series of photographs. Michael and Jessica entering a hotel. Michael with his arm around her waist. Jessica laughing at something he said, her hand on his chest. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Tom said softly. "I know this isn't easy to see." I nodded, feeling numb. "Thank you," I managed to say, "for everything." As I drove home, my mind was racing. What was I going to do now? Confront Michael? Leave him? The thought of breaking up our family made me feel physically ill. But how could I stay with a man who had so thoroughly betrayed my trust? I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the turn into our neighborhood. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Michael's car was already there. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and went inside. Michael was in the kitchen making dinner. The kids were at the table, doing homework. It was such a normal, domestic scene that for a moment, I almost convinced myself that the past few weeks had been a bad dream. "Mom!" Emma called out. "Dad's making spaghetti." I forced a smile. "That's great, sweetie." Michael turned to me, a spatula in hand. "Hey, you're home late. Everything okay?" I looked at him. This man I had loved for so long. This man who had fathered my children. This man who had been living a double life. In that moment, I made a decision. "Kids," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "why don't you go play in your rooms for a bit? Dad and I need to talk." As Emma and Ethan scampered off, Michael's smile faded. He must have seen something in my face, because he put down the spatula and turned off the stove. "Sarah," he said, his voice wary, "what's going on?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. "Michael," I said, "we need to talk about Jessica." The moment those words left my mouth, I saw Michael's face change. It was like watching a mask slip off, revealing the stranger underneath. His eyes darted around the room, looking anywhere but at me. "Jessica," he said, his voice higher than usual. "What about her?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I know, Michael, I know everything." He tried to laugh it off, but it came out more like a choke. "What are you talking about, Sarah? Jessica's just my assistant." "Long enough," I replied. "How long has it been going on?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking everywhere but at me. "A few months," he mumbled. "A few months." The words hit me like a physical blow. All those late nights at the office, all those missed family dinners and recitals, he'd been with her. "Why?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "Why? Michael? Wasn't I enough? Weren't we enough?" He finally looked at me then, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, it's not like that. I love you and the kids. Jessica, it's complicated." I laughed bitterly. "Complicated? No, Michael. Complicated is trying to juggle work and 2 kids. Complicated is trying to keep a marriage strong after 10 years. Cheating on your wife, that's not complicated, that's just selfish." He flinched at my words. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never meant for this to happen. It just did." I shook my head, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "Things don't just happen, Michael. You made choices. Every time you lied to me, every time you met her, every time you touched her, those were all choices. Choices you made knowing they would hurt me, hurt our family." He stepped towards me, reaching out. "Sarah, please, we can work this out. I'll end it with Jessica, I promise. We can go to counseling, we can." I held up a hand, stopping him. "No, Michael, we can't. You've broken something here, something I'm not sure can be fixed." "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice trembling. I took a deep breath. "I'm saying I need time. Time to think. Time to process all of this. I think you should leave." His face crumpled. "Leave? But what about the kids? What will we tell them?" The mention of our children sent a fresh wave of pain through me. "We'll figure that out," I said. "But right now, I can't even look at you without feeling sick. I need space." Michael opened his mouth to argue, but something in my face must have stopped him. He nodded slowly, defeated. "Where will I go?" he asked. I felt a surge of bitter anger. "I'm sure Jessica has room at her place," I spat. He flinched again but didn't argue. Silently, he went upstairs to pack a bag. I stood in the kitchen, feeling numb, listening to the sounds of him moving around upstairs. When he came back down, bag in hand, he paused at the door. "Sarah, don't." I cut him off. "Just go." As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, finally letting the tears come. I don't know how long I sat there, sobbing silently, when I felt small arms wrap around me. "Mommy," Emma's voice was scared. "Why are you crying? Where's Daddy going?" I looked up to see both my children standing there, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. In that moment, my heart broke all over again. "Come here," I said, pulling them both into my arms. "Mommy and Daddy, We're having some grown-up problems right now. Daddy's going to stay somewhere else for a little while." "Is he coming back?" Ethan asked, his lower lip trembling. I stroked his hair, fighting back fresh tears. "I don't know, sweetie. I don't know." That night, after I'd finally gotten the kids to sleep, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the spaghetti Michael had left half-cooked on the stove. It felt like a metaphor for our marriage, abandoned, unfinished. As I cleaned up the mess, my mind raced with questions. What was I going to do now? How would I manage on my own? Could I ever trust Michael again, even if he did end things with Jessica? I thought about the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared. It all seemed like a cruel joke now. How could he throw it all away for some fling with his assistant? But as I crawled into our bed, my bed now, I supposed, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed in with the pain and anger. The truth was out. No more lies, no more suspicion. Whatever happened next, at least I wouldn't be living in the dark anymore. As I drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the day, I made a promise to myself. No matter what happened with Michael, no matter how hard things got, I would be strong. For myself and for my children. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The next few weeks were a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and difficult conversations. Telling the kids that Daddy wouldn't be coming home for a while was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Emma cried herself to sleep every night for a week, and Ethan became withdrawn, barely speaking. I was running on autopilot, trying to keep our lives as normal as possible. But everywhere I looked, there were reminders of Michael and the life we'd shared. His coffee mug in the cupboard, his shirts in the closet, his toothbrush in the bathroom. Each one felt like a stab to the heart. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. Dark circles under my eyes, hair a mess, shoulders slumped. When had I become this person? That's when I knew I needed help. I couldn't keep going like this, not for myself and certainly not for my kids. I called my sister, Kate, and poured out everything that had happened. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice full of sympathy. "Why didn't you call me sooner? I'm coming over right now." True to her word, Kate arrived an hour later, armed with ice cream and a determined look in her eye. "All right, sis," she said, pulling me into a hug. "We're going to get through this together." Over the next few days, Kate was my rock. She helped with the kids, listened to me rant and cry, and most importantly, pushed me to start taking care of myself again. "You need to see someone," she insisted one evening after the kids were in bed. "A therapist. This is too much to handle on your own." I resisted at first. The idea of spilling my guts to a stranger felt wrong somehow. But Kate was persistent. And eventually, I gave in. Dr. Melinda Carter was nothing like I'd imagined a therapist would be. She was warm and down to earth, with a no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated. "Sarah," she said in our first session, "what happened to you is awful, but it doesn't define you. You're more than Michael's wife or ex-wife. You're a person in your own right, with your own dreams and desires. It's time we start focusing on those." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. When was the last time I'd thought about what I wanted, separate from my roles as wife and mother? Over the next few weeks, Dr. Carter helped me navigate the storm of emotions I was feeling, the anger, the betrayal, the fear of the future. But she also pushed me to think about what I wanted my life to look like moving forward. "You have a chance to reinvent yourself," she told me, "to build a life that's truly yours. What does that look like to you?" I started small. I joined a gym, something I'd always wanted to do but never found the time for. I started reading again, losing myself in books during the quiet evenings after the kids were asleep. I even signed up for a creative writing class at the local community college, rekindling a passion I'd abandoned years ago. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Carter suggested I start journaling. At first, I felt silly. like a teenager scribbling in a diary. But as I kept at it, I found it incredibly cathartic. I poured out all my anger, my fears, my hopes onto those pages, and slowly I started to feel lighter. One entry in particular stands out in my memory. Today, I realized something. I'm angry at Michael, yes, but I'm also angry at myself for ignoring the red flags, for letting myself become so dependent on him. But that stops now. I can't change what happened, but I can change what happens next. I'm taking back control of my life. Watch me. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel like myself again, or rather, a new version of myself. Stronger, more independent. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed me. The kids were adjusting too. We had our rough patches, tantrums, tears, questions I didn't know how to answer, but we were figuring it out together. We started new traditions, like Friday night pizza and movie nights, just the three of us. Michael and I communicated mostly through texts and emails, arranging his visits with the kids. It was stilted and awkward, but we were managing. He'd ended things with Jessica, he told me, and wanted to work on our marriage, but I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't sure I ever would be. One Saturday morning, as I was sipping my coffee and watching Emma and Ethan play in the backyard, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael. "Can we talk? In person. There's something I need to tell you." I stared at the message, my heart racing. What could he possibly have to say that he couldn't say over the phone? Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep him at arm's length. But another part, the stronger part, knew I had to face this head on. I took a deep breath and typed out a reply. "Okay, come over this evening after the kids are in bed." As I hit send, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination wash over me. Whatever Michael had to say, whatever bombshell he was about to drop, I knew I could handle it. I wasn't the same woman he'd left months ago. I was stronger now, more resilient. I looked out at my kids again, their laughter floating through the open window. For them, for myself, I would face whatever was coming. Because that's what I'd learned through all of this. I was capable of so much more than I'd ever given myself credit for. As I started preparing for the day ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's conversation with Michael would be a turning point. But this time, I was ready. Bring it on, I thought. I'm not backing down anymore. The hours crawled by as I waited for Michael to arrive. I kept myself busy, tidying up the house and getting the kids ready for bed. As I tucked Emma in, she looked up at me with those big brown eyes. "Is Daddy coming home?" she asked, her voice small and hopeful. I smoothed her hair back, my heart aching. "No, sweetie, Daddy's just coming to talk to Mommy for a little bit. You'll be asleep by then." After both kids were finally settled, I paced the living room, my nerves on edge. At 8:30 sharp, there was a knock at the door. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and opened it. Michael stood there, looking different, thinner, maybe, tired. He'd grown a beard, which was new. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us. "Hi," he said finally. "Thanks for seeing me." I nodded, stepping back to let him in. "The kids are asleep," I said, leading him to the kitchen. "Do you want coffee?" He shook his head. "No, thanks. I can't stay long." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared countless family meals. Now it felt like a barrier between us. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what did you need to tell me?" Michael took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "I'm leaving," he said. "The company's transferring me to the branch office." I blinked, caught off guard. Of all the things I'd imagined he might say, this wasn't one of them. "Leaving to where?" "Chicago," he replied. "It's a promotion. I'd be overseeing the entire Midwest region." I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. Chicago. That was halfway across the country. "When?" I managed to ask. "2 weeks," he said, not meeting my eyes. "2 weeks?" I repeated, my voice rising. "And you're just telling me now?" What about the kids, Michael? What about your visitation? He flinched at my tone. I know, it's not ideal, but this is a huge opportunity, Sarah. I couldn't turn it down. I laughed bitterly. Couldn't turn it down. Like you couldn't turn down sleeping with your assistant. His face hardened. That's not fair. I've apologized for that. I'm trying to make things right. By moving 1,000 miles away, I shot back. How is that making things right? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. I thought maybe this would be better. For everyone. A clean break. I stared at him, incredulous. A clean break? We have children, Michael. There's no such thing as a clean break. He had the decency to look ashamed. I know, I don't know how to do this, Sarah. How to be here but not be here. It's killing me. Killing you, I repeated, my voice dangerously low. You think this is killing you? Try explaining to your kids why their daddy doesn't live with them anymore. Try watching them cry themselves to sleep because they miss you. Try rebuilding your entire life from scratch because the person you trusted most in the world betrayed you. My words hung in the air between us. Michael looked stricken, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never meant to hurt you, any of you. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Intentions don't mean much when the damage is already done, Michael. We sat in silence for a moment, the ticking of the kitchen clock suddenly very loud. So what now? I asked finally. You just up and leave. What do we tell the kids? He shrugged helplessly. I don't know. I thought maybe you could bring them to visit during school breaks, and I'd come back for holidays. I shook my head, disbelieving. You really don't get it, do you? They need their father, Michael, not just on holidays, every day. What do you want me to do, Sarah? He asked, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. Turn down the job, stay here where I'm miserable. I want you to be a father, I snapped. I want you to put your children first for once in your life. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You think this is easy for me? You think I want to leave my kids? But I can't stay here, Sarah. I can't watch you move on with your life while I'm stuck in limbo. I stood too, anger coursing through me. Stuck in limbo? You did this, Michael. You created this situation, and now you're running away from it. We glared at each other across the table, years of love and hurt and anger swirling between us. Finally, Michael's shoulders slumped. I don't know what else to do, he said quietly. I'm drowning here, Sarah. I felt my anger deflate, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Then learn to swim, I said. Because those kids need you. And if you walk away now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. He nodded slowly, his eyes meeting mine. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But then it was gone, replaced by a stranger I barely recognized. I'll think about it, he said finally, and I promise. As I watched him walk out the door, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief, and something else. Something that felt a lot like freedom. I realized then that I'd been holding on to a tiny shred of hope. Hope that somehow we could fix this, that we could go back to the way things were. But now I knew. There was no going back, only forward. As I locked the door behind Michael, I made a silent promise to myself and to my children. Whatever happened next, whatever Michael decided, we would be okay, because we had each other, and that was enough. I climbed the stairs to check on the kids, my mind already racing with plans. If Michael left, we'd need to adjust our schedules, maybe find a new routine. If he stayed, well, we'd cross that bridge when we came to it. As I peeked into Emma's room, seeing her sleeping peacefully, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I had, and I was going to make the most of it, for myself and for my children. Whatever tomorrow brought, I was ready. Bring it on, world. Sarah Thompson 2.0 is here to stay. The next morning, I woke up feeling different, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. As I got the kids ready for school, I found myself humming. Emma noticed right away. "You're happy today, Mommy," she said, her little face brightening. I scooped her up in a hug. "I am, sweetie. I really am." After dropping the kids off, I headed to work. As I walked into the teacher's lounge, my colleague and friend Rachel raised an eyebrow. Well, she said. "Someone's got a spring in her step today. What's going on?" I sat down next to her, a small smile playing on my lips. I think I'm finally ready to move on." Rachel's eyes widened. "Really? What happened?" I told her about Michael's visit, about his plans to move to Chicago. As I recounted the conversation, I realized something. You know what? For the first time since this whole mess started, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt strong. Rachel squeezed my hand. "That's because you are strong, Sarah. You've been through hell and back, and you're still standing. That's something to be proud of." Her words hit home. I had been through hell, but I'd survived. More than that, I was starting to thrive. That afternoon, during my free period, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I called a lawyer. "I think it's time we discuss divorce proceedings," I told her. The words felt strange in my mouth, but also oddly freeing. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into building my new life. I started looking for a smaller house, something more manageable on my teacher's salary. I signed up for a yoga class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. But the biggest change came when I decided to go back to school. I'd always dreamed of getting my master's degree, maybe even a PhD one day. With Michael, it had always seemed like a far-off fantasy. Now it felt like a real possibility. "Are you sure about this?" my sister Kate asked when I told her my plans. "It's going to be a lot of work, especially with the kids." "I'm sure," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. I need to do this, for me. As I filled out the application for the online program, I felt a surge of excitement. This was my chance to reinvent myself, to become the person I'd always wanted to be. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments when the pain hit me like a tidal wave. Nights when I'd lie awake wondering how my life had taken such a drastic turn. Days when the sight of a happy couple would bring tears to my eyes. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. And when they did come, I had tools to deal with them now. My journal, my therapist, my support system of family and friends. One Saturday afternoon, as I was helping Emma with her homework, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael. "I've decided to take the job in Chicago. I'm sorry. Can we talk about arrangements for the kids?" I stared at the message, waiting for the wave of anger or hurt to wash over me. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt calm, resolved. "Okay," I texted back. "And let's set up a time to discuss it." As I put my phone down, Emma looked up at me. "Was that Daddy?" she asked. I nodded, pulling her into my lap. "Yes, sweetie. Daddy's going to be moving away for his job, but he still loves you and Ethan very much. And we're going to figure out a way for you to see him, okay?" Emma's lower lip trembled. "But why does he have to go?" I hugged her tight, my heart aching. "Sometimes, honey, grown-ups have to make hard choices. But I promise you, no matter what, you and Ethan will always have me. We're a team, remember?" She nodded against my chest. "Team Thompson," she mumbled, using the silly name we'd come up with during one of our family game nights. "That's right," I said, kissing the top of her head, "and Team Thompson forever." That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, looking up at the stars. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, so sure of her place in the world. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, shattered and lost. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, stronger, more resilient, a little battered, maybe, but not broken. As I sipped my wine, I made a silent toast to new beginnings, to second chances, to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I'd ever trust enough to fall in love again. I didn't know if I'd succeed in my new academic pursuits or if I'd stumble along the way. But I did know one thing. Whatever came my way, I was ready for it. Because I discovered a strength in myself that I never knew existed. A strength that had been there all along, just waiting for the chance to shine. As I headed back inside, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had stood in this spot a year ago. She was older. Yes, a little more worn, but her eyes were bright with determination and hope. "Watch out, world," I whispered to my reflection. "Sarah Thompson is back, and this time, she's unstoppable." With that, I turned off the porch light and went inside, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was excited for it. The next few months flew by in a whirlwind of change. Michael moved to Chicago, and we settled into a new routine with the kids. It wasn't easy, especially at first. There were tears and tantrums, late-night phone calls, and more than a few moments when I wondered if we'd made the right decision. But slowly, surely, we found our rhythm. The kids spent most of their time with me, visiting Michael during school breaks and holidays. It wasn't perfect, but we were making it work. As for me, I threw myself into my new life with a passion that surprised even myself. My master's program was challenging, but I loved every minute of it. There was something exhilarating about stretching my mind, about rediscovering my love for learning. One evening, as I was working on a particularly tough assignment, Emma wandered into my study. "What are you doing, Mommy?" she asked, peering at my laptop screen. I pulled her onto my lap. "I'm writing a paper about how to help kids who are having a hard time in school," I explained. She nodded solemnly. "Like when I was sad about Daddy leaving." My heart clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "Exactly. And you know what? You taught me a lot about how to help kids through tough times." She beamed at me, and in that moment, I knew I was on the right path. My new career wasn't the only change in my life. I'd started dating again, tentatively at first. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and the occasional dinner. It felt strange at first, putting myself out there again. But it was also nice to be seen as Sarah, not just as a wife or a mother, but as a woman in her own right. There was one date in particular that stood out. His name was David, a divorced dad I'd met through a support group. We'd gone out for dinner, and as we were walking back to our cars, he turned to me. "You know, Sarah," he said, his eyes twinkling, "you're pretty amazing. The way you've handled everything, how you're reinventing yourself, it's inspiring." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. "I'm just doing what I have to do," I said. He shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You're thriving. A lot of people would have given up, but you're soaring." His words stayed with me long after the date ended. Was I really thriving? I thought about where I'd been a year ago and where I was now. And you know what? He was right. I was soaring. Of course, life wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still challenges. Like the day I ran into Jessica at the grocery store. I'd been in the produce section, debating between two types of apples, when I heard a familiar voice. "Sarah?" I turned to see Jessica standing there, looking uncomfortable. For a moment, I felt a flash of the old anger and hurt. But then, something strange happened. I looked at her, really looked at her, and all I felt was pity. "Hello, Jessica," I said, my voice calm. She twisted her hands nervously. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." I nodded, surprised to find that I meant it when I said, "Thank you. I appreciate that." As she walked away, I realized something. The anger that had been my constant companion for so long was gone. In its place was a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The real test came a few months later, when Michael came to town for Ethan's birthday. It was the first time we'd all been together since the divorce was finalized. As I watched Michael playing with the kids in the backyard, I felt a twinge of sadness for what we'd lost. But it was overshadowed by a stronger feeling, pride. Pride in how far we'd come, in how we'd managed to put our children first despite everything. That night, after the kids were in bed, Michael and I sat on the porch, nursing cups of coffee. "You look good, Sarah," he said softly. "Happy?" I smiled. "I am happy. It's been a long road, but I'm in a good place now." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "I'm glad. You deserve it, to be happy." We sat in companionable silence for a while, the tension that had defined our interactions for so long finally dissipating. As Michael was leaving, he paused at the door. "I really messed up," he said. "I see that now. But watching you these past few months, seeing how strong you are, I think maybe it worked out for the best. You've become this incredible person, Sarah. I'm sorry I couldn't see it before." I felt tears prick my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition of how far I'd come, of the strength I'd found within myself. "Thank you, Michael," I said. "I think maybe you're right." As I closed the door behind him, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life that had been Sarah and Michael was truly over. But the story of Sarah, that was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up early. As I sipped my coffee, watching the sunrise, I thought about all that had happened. The pain, the struggles, the triumphs. And I realized something. This journey, as difficult as it had been, had given me a gift. It had shown me who I really was, what I was capable of. I pulled out my journal and began to write. The words flowed easily, telling the story of a woman who had been broken but had put herself back together, stronger than before. As I wrote the final words, I felt a sense of excitement. This wasn't just my story, it was a story that could help others, could show them that there was life after heartbreak, that they too could rise from the ashes of a shattered relationship. I saved the document and opened up my email. With a deep breath, I composed a new message. "Dear literary agent, I have a story to tell. A story of betrayal and heartbreak, yes, but also a story of resilience, of rediscovery, of the strength that lies within us all. It's a story I believe many women need to hear. Attached, please find the first chapter of my memoir, Rising, one woman's journey from heartbreak to triumph. I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Sarah Thompson." As I hit send, I felt a thrill of anticipation. This was the start of something new, something exciting. Whatever happened next, I was ready for it, because I was Sarah Thompson, and I was unstoppable.